In the last session, Jesus seems to identify us as worthless slaves. And while I think at this point in this course, we all get the theological point that Jesus was making, it still does seem kind of harsh. Being a worthless slave sounds like it's directly opposed to being God's beloved children, God's beloved sheep, and God's spouse. Not to mention the fact that Jesus did find us worthy enough to become human for, to live for, and to die for. Of course, the parable seems to be more about humility and not thinking too haughtily of ourselves, but it can be disorienting. Which reminded me of another parable, which might just serve as a bit of a palate cleanser from the last one. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable about a man who was going to go on a journey. The man calls together his 3 slaves, and he gives one of them 5 talents. He gives another 2 talents, and another 1 talent. Remember that a talent was roughly worth a year's wage. In 2019, the average yearly salary of a person in America was about $36,000. So we could take that as the modern equivalent of the talent. So one slave got around $180,000. One slave got $72,000 and another got $36,000. I mean, any way you cut it, each of the slaves got an incredible sum of money. Here, we see that aspect of ancient slavery again. Some lucky slaves could have access to incredible amounts of resources. I wouldn't say it was common, but it certainly wasn't outside the realm of possibility. We also see a slave master entrust his slaves with a lot of responsibility. Again, that was common of ancient slavery, especially for urban slaves who would have been afforded the opportunity to earn their master's trust. The slave who had been given 1 talent was scared to lose it. He was worried what the master would do to him if he did lose it. So he buried the talent. This infuriated the master in the parable because he wanted him to do something with what he had been given. The other 2 slaves, who had been given 5 and 2 talents respectively, managed to double their master's investment. They had been given resources to do something, and they did. Of course, this is what this parable is all about. God gives us gifts and resources. God did not give them so that we would bury them and out of fear fail to use them. God gives us gifts and resources to use for the coming of the kingdom. But here's why I bring up this parable. When the master receives his money back, doubled, through the investment of his 2 slaves, the master says, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." Far from being worthless slaves, these 2 are heralded as good and trustworthy. Well done, good and trustworthy slave, or good and trustworthy servant, have become the words that we hope to be greeted with at the end of our lives. In our lives here, God has given us out of his abundance, and in our lives we are likewise to use those gifts in abundance. Personally, throughout my life, when I've heard these words, I oftentimes get a little emotional. They are beautiful and tender, and they do what this parable is meant to do: inspire me to do as God does, as well as I am able.